Reinforcement comes in two flavors, conditioned or unconditioned. Unconditioned reinforcement does not require learning history to have reinforcing qualities. Think of it as a more inherent thing. Things such as food, warmth, water, some forms of human interaction. These are unlearned. We're kind of born with them. You can think of it kind of as an innate thing to innate. These are also known in ABA terminology as a primary reinforcer. Again, unconditioned reinforcement does not require the learning history to have reinforcing qualities. It is more inherent. When an infant is born, they engage in behaviors that seek out the mother's breast milk or some sort of food. They do not need to learn how to do that. Food is a good thing. It's desirable. Conditioned reinforcement. This requires a learning history. Previously neutral stimuli become a reinforcer through association or pairing with established reinforcers. This takes place over time. This is also known as secondary reinforcement or secondary reinforcers. Stickers, tokens, toys, those are all examples of secondary reinforcers. Stickers, a star sticker to someone who's never seen one or has no experience with it getting them anything, is a totally neutral stimuli. It doesn't mean anything to them. They could probably care less. But if every time they get 5 stickers on a chart, they get a favorite toy or a favorite food, it starts to become reinforcing. And they start to work for those stickers. A special kind of conditioned reinforcer is a generalized conditioned reinforcer. This is paired with many conditioned and unconditioned reinforcers. Money, tokens, points are examples of this. Remember, money, a $20 bill to someone who's never seen it, is going to be neutral. Doesn't mean anything. For example, when my 2-year-old, when we were getting him a birthday present, a $20 bill would have meant nothing to him. He didn't care about that. He didn't understand at that time that money got him anything. My 10-year-old would have loved the $20 bill because he knows what it means. To my 2-year-old, money was a neutral stimulus. But now that he's a little bit older, he totally understands what it means. Because money has been paired with being able to buy lots of things, such as food, an unconditioned reinforcement, toys, conditioned reinforcers, and much more. The point is that when I say a generalized conditioned reinforcer, that just means it's been paired with many conditioned and unconditioned reinforcers. And then there's this idea of continuous versus intermittent reinforcement. Continuous reinforcement says that reinforcement is given after every response. For example, every time you eat your favorite dish from your favorite restaurant, it is tasty. Or every time I press that little button on my phone, the screen comes on. Intermittent reinforcement says that reinforcement is given after some responses. Gambling is an example of this. Telling jokes. Not every joke knocks it out of the park, right? Or some people may not find it funny. But occasionally people do find it funny, so it's intermittently reinforced. Saying hello to strangers. Not everyone's going to say hi back or be kind back, but enough people are that you continue that behavior. So reinforcement is given after some responses. And I do want to take a little bit of time to talk about how powerful that can actually be, especially in the realm of problematic behaviors. Intermittent reinforcement that's given after some responses, actually maintains very strong. Okay, it maintains itself very strongly. Okay, why? Well, because it pays off every once in a while. Okay, and so as we go on, as you become more fluent in ABA, what you'll find is that as you give reinforcement, you'll start to not give it every single response. Why? Because it's not natural to do so. No one follows people around with M&Ms or Skittles to give every correct response, and not everyone says high five, good job for every good thing you do. So it's more natural to do intermittent reinforcement, this idea that it's going only after some responses. Okay, but if you think about it from a problematic behavior, a problem behavior standpoint, if it's paying off every once in a while, it's going to actually take longer to get rid of. So again, as an RBT, you do want to understand that there is continuous reinforcement and intermittent reinforcement. Continuous means that reinforcement is given after every response, and intermittent reinforcement means reinforcement is given after some responses. So let's take a note about natural reinforcement versus artificial reinforcement. Natural reinforcement is any reinforcement which occurs as a natural result of a behavior in a typical setting. Artificial reinforcement is any reinforcement which is not a natural result of a behavior in a typical setting. Within intermittent reinforcement, there are two broad categories, ratio and intervals. Ratios are the number of responses needed. This means that we're going to give reinforcement dependent on the number of responses, whatever that is. So we might say something like, we'll reinforce in a ratio of every 3 responses. So for every 3 correct responses, that person will get reinforced. Intervals, on the other hand, require a time frame. The reinforcement is dependent on the amount of time passing. Okay, once that time is passed, the first correct behavior after that time is reinforced. Okay, we might say something like, we're going to reinforce every target item, or we're going to reinforce one target item after the 3 minutes. So, and then after that correct response, we start the 3-minute interval again. So again, we reinforce the first correct target behavior after the interval. Once that's happened, we start the interval over. Variable or intermittent reinforcement means that we're not giving reinforcement for every response. This is good for responses that are already established, or the person already has the skills in their repertoire, or the skill is very easy for them. Here's an example of what intermittent reinforcement might look like. We provide Jerry with reinforcement for every few responses in this example. So the RBT says, where's the car? The patient touches the car. Then they say, where's the horse? The patient touches the horse. The RBT reinforces. Where's the house? The patient touches house. Where's the airplane? The patient touches the airplane. And then finally the RBT says, where's the apple? And the patient touches the apple. And the RBT reinforces. So as you can see here, the RBT is not reinforcing every correct response. This would be intermittent reinforcement. Variable reinforcement on a fixed ratio. This establishes the criteria for a number of responses and stays consistent. So if it is a fixed ratio of 3, also denoted by FR3, we're going to reinforce every third correct response. For example, I would say touch nose, they would touch nose. Touch eye, they touch eyes, and then say touch ears, and once they touch ears, I would say, hey, awesome job, you know your body parts. Okay, so I'm reinforcing every third correct response. A variable ratio, on the other hand, also establishes a criteria for number of responses, and this will also stay consistent. Okay, so if it is a variable ratio 5, VR5, we're going to reinforce, on average, every 5th response. So that could be the 7th response or the 3rd response. It could be the 10th or the 1st. As long as over the time frame that you're doing this, it averages out to 5. Variable reinforcement and variable ratio can produce a very strong response rate. If you think about gambling, okay, why do people continue to gamble, or why do you flip through Netflix? At some point, I don't know what a good example of this, but what is actually a good example? Because every once in a while it pays off. Okay, going through Netflix, every once in a while you find a really good movie that you want to watch. Okay, this type of variable reinforcement is going to be very strong. Okay, because it produces strong responses because it pays off every once in a while. The point in variable ratio, though, is that ratio stays consistent. You have a VR5, So that means on average every 5th response. So like I said, it could be the 1st response or the 10th response. There's also the fixed interval. Okay. So if it's a fixed interval, say fixed interval 2, we're going to reinforce the first correct response after 2 minutes. So after the correct response, the interval starts over. In variable interval, we're going to reinforce, do the same thing, we're going to reinforce after a certain amount of time, but on average it's going to be that like 3 minutes. Okay, so if we have a VI 3, which is variable interval 3, we're going to reinforce after intervals to average out to 3 minutes. So some of those intervals might be 2 minutes, some may be 5, some may be 6, some may be 1. Just needs to average out to 3. So you have intermittent reinforcement, which is not reinforcing every response. And within that you have ratio and interval. The second kind of type of reinforcement you may use is continuous reinforcement, where we're going to reinforce every correct response. This is great for acquisition and target skills. It's great for new behavior plan target behaviors, where we're going to reinforce every desired behavior. It's great for difficult skills. And it's what we usually use social reinforcement during errorless learning. So an example right now for me is my son is learning how to swim. For my other 2 kids, every time they go underwater and move a little bit, I'm not telling them good job, I'm not telling them it's something they already know how to do. It's great, it's great they know how to do it. But for my little guy who's learning to swim, I am heaping on the praise every single time he does, because it's a new skill for him, it's difficult for him. Schedules of reinforcement in the RBT. As the RBT, I want you to be familiar with the schedule of reinforcement for the program is. Newer items or acquisition items should be reinforced continuously, each correct response. Newer behavior goals should also be reinforced continuously. But again, this could depend on the patient. I can't say that as an all-the-time rule, but for the most part, newer items or acquisition items are going to be reinforced continuously. Variable reinforcement keeps behavior strong, but fades out reinforcers. Remember, in variable reinforcement, you're not being reinforced for every correct response. This keeps behavior strong, but we can fade out reinforcers over time. Just like we fade out prompts, or extra stimulus prompts, or extra help, we can also fade out reinforcement. After all, as good as this world might sound, we're not going to be following people around M&Ms and saying, great job for every single thing they do. So again, we have to fade out reinforcement, and variable reinforcement is a great tool for that. Our society mostly is based on variable reinforcement. If you think about paychecks are a variable reinforcement that's based on a fixed interval, right? After a certain amount of time, you get reinforced. Okay? But again, continuous reinforcement also helps us to learn new skills or to get that big project done. Another thing I want you to understand is you can use more than one at a time for different types of reinforcement. For example, I will use continuous reinforcement schedule in regards to social reinforcement and a variable one in regards to tangibles. I'll say good job or fantastic work, etc. for correct responses, but I'll give a favorite toy or candy for every few responses. And likewise, when I work with older patients, or I work with patients who obviously know how to do some things or have already got a lot of skills in repertoire, I'm not going to reinforce them every single time with things. I'm going to give them variable reinforcement. But again, as the RBT, it is your job to be familiar with that in the protocol, but to also understand the kind of thinking behind this. Another thing I want you to realize is that variable reinforcement schedules work well to maintain good behavior, and we discussed that already, but they also work just as well to maintain undesired behavior. Remember, variably reinforced behavior persists because it pays off every once in a while. My daughter actually has a pretty big issue with this. Okay, she will ask and someone will tell her no. But because in her learning history, if she's persistent and she asks again maybe a couple minutes later, or puts on those cute eyes or whatever she does, every once in a while her continuing to do that pays off. Okay, and I'm guilty of that, and grandparent stuff as well. But the point is that I've let that pay off every once in a while. Okay, once I realized that, I started to be a little more consistent in how I implement or consistent in how I responded. But the point being, though, is that variably reinforced behavior will persist because it pays off every once in a while. Just like my daughter, the individual may keep pushing until they get what they want, especially if that has worked in the past. Okay, this is why consistency is highly important in intervening on problem behavior. This is why we strive to be as consistent as possible in implementing the behavior plan. So, examples of natural reinforcement. Remember, natural reinforcement occurs as a natural result in that environment. So, if a child asks for a cookie at their home and they get a cookie, that's a natural reinforcement, right? That's something that would occur in that home when the cookies are available. Okay, a patient completes a demand to put on her shoes or jacket and they gets to play on the playground. Okay, it's naturally related. Before you go outside, put your shoes and jacket on. If a kid asks me for a high five and I give him one, that's natural reinforcement. They asked for it and I gave it to them. You press that power button on your remote and the TV turns on. It's a natural expected response. Contrast this with artificial reinforcement. If a child asks me for a cookie and gets a cookie and a token for using his words, so again, they got the cookie but they also got the token because they actually used their words, that would be artificial reinforcement. The token is not a natural result of them asking for a cookie. If the patient completes a demand to put on their shoes and jacket and then gets $1 from mom, that's an artificial reinforcement, right? It's not natural to get the $1 just for putting your shoes and jacket on. But because we're using it as artificial reinforcement, there, it would be there. Okay? A child asks for a high five and they get a hug. Okay, that's artificial reinforcement. That's not what they were asking. Okay? Or maybe more funny, right, is that you press the power button in a remote and the garage door opens. Okay, artificial reinforcement. Don't know when we would actually use that one. But the top example is a really good example of artificial reinforcement. If we're working on a child using their words, they both get the cookie for using their word, but they also get a token, which is going to promote them using their words more. So again, artificial reinforcement. Natural reinforcement versus artificial reinforcement. Our ultimate goal, my ultimate goal as a behavior analyst, and yours as an RBT, is to reinforce all behavior using natural reinforcement. Now, of course, we're not going to start off that way. A lot of our patients that we work with are going to need the artificial reinforcement. But our ultimate goal is to get them into a more natural reinforcement contingencies. Frequently, we have to add artificial reinforcement to increase behaviors. But as an analyst and as an RBT, we are going to strive to fade those out so that the behavior will maintain on its own. This has several benefits, right? First of all, we don't need to use artificial. We don't have to carry around the artificial ones all over the place. But it also means that it's going to become just more natural, more normalized for that person. And instead of you having to follow the person around to give the reinforcement, the natural environment is going to be providing that reinforcement. So if we were teaching a person to talk, and now suddenly they know how to order their food or ask what time the bus is coming to other people, getting the information itself is going to serve as reinforcement. Or if we're giving $10 for every A that an individual gets, but they also notice that when they're getting A's and paying attention in class, that the teacher really enjoys it, and they have more time to play, they have more time to hang out with their friends, we can start to remove that money, and it becomes more naturally reinforcing just to get the A's. Again, this is a very systematic process. It can take a long time, but our ultimate goal is to reinforce all behavior on these natural contingencies.